The hall was buzzing with chatter, glasses clinking, and the faint scent of expensive perfume and polished wood filling the air. This was one of those events where everyone wanted to see and be seen, where appearances mattered more than anything else. People in tailored suits and sparkling dresses moved from group to group, exchanging polite smiles and soft laughter. The atmosphere was lively, but it carried a certain kind of coldness, the kind that makes anyone who doesn't belong feel invisible in the midst of all this. A young woman quietly stepped through the side door. She was dressed simply in clothes that had clearly been well loved, carrying a small, worn-out sheet of music in her hands. There was no jewelry to catch the light, no designer bag hanging from her shoulder, nothing to announce her presence. To anyone glancing her way, she might have seemed ordinary, even invisible. But there was a calm determination in her eyes, a quiet strength that she carried like a shield. Against the judgment of others, she walked toward the stage at the far end of the hall. The stage was raised slightly above the floor, with a single piano sitting in the center. It was an old piano, scratched and chipped, with keys that had yellowed over time. A small crack ran along the side of the wood, and a few keys were slightly misaligned. It wasn't the kind of piano anyone expected to hear beautiful music from, especially not in a room full of people who were used to luxury and perfection. When she reached the piano and carefully sat down on the wooden bench, a ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. She could feel their eyes on her, their disbelief and judgment hanging in the air like a heavy curtain. Whispers spread from group to group. "Who let her near the piano?" One voice sneered. "She looks like she's going to ruin the whole night," said another. Even the host of the event, a man who prided himself on sophistication and taste, could not hide a smirk as he glanced toward her. She could feel her heart beating faster, but she didn't move. She simply let herself take a deep breath, letting the tension slip from her shoulders. She reminded herself why she was there, not for the approval of the wealthy crowd, not to impress anyone, and certainly not to compete with the expectations of others. She was there because music was her life, because the piano had always been a part of her, and because she knew deep down that talent and passion could shine even in the most unlikely places. The laughter continued, growing louder as a few people in the front row exchanged mocking smiles. One man, leaning against the polished railing with a glass of champagne in his hand, whispered loudly enough for several others to hear, "Look at her, struggling to even reach the keys. This will be good for a laugh." She looked down at the piano keys. Some were slightly sticky, some made faint clinking noises when pressed, but she didn't hesitate. She placed her hands carefully on the keys and closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting herself imagine the music she wanted to create. In her mind, the scratches and cracks on the piano faded away, replaced by the sound of a melody so clear and so alive that it would make everyone forget the imperfections around them. Opening her eyes, she pressed the first note. It was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried a purity that no one in the room had expected. Some of the laughter faltered for a moment, replaced by curious glances. People shifted in their seats, leaning slightly forward. A few heads turned, and the whispers began to quiet. They were waiting now, not for a joke, but to see if what they thought was impossible might actually happen, she continued, her fingers moving with confidence and grace, despite the uneven surface of the piano. Each note she played seemed to rise above the room, wrapping around the laughter and skepticism like a warm, persistent breeze. The melody was gentle at first, careful, as if she were testing the room, testing the audience, and testing the piano itself. But as she became more comfortable, the notes grew bolder, more expressive. She leaned into the music, letting her emotions flow through her hands and into the piano. In the crowd, a few people exchanged puzzled looks. "How is she doing that?" one whispered, her voice barely audible over the faint hum of the hall. "I thought this piano was broken," said another. Even the host, who had been so sure this would be a moment of ridicule, furrowed his brow in confusion. There was something different happening here, something unexpected, something that was starting to capture the attention of even the most judgmental eyes in the room, but not everyone had noticed yet. A group in the back was still chuckling quietly, thinking this was just the beginning of a train wreck. They hadn't seen the change yet. They hadn't seen how someone could take something flawed and make it sing. Yet, with each passing second, the melody grew richer, more compelling, weaving through the air with a strength and beauty that seemed impossible given the state of the piano. She didn't need to see the faces in the crowd. She didn't need to hear the whispers. She simply let herself become one with the music. Her hands moved with precision, her mind focused entirely on the story she was telling through the piano. Every note had meaning, every pause carried emotion. It wasn't about perfection. It was about connection. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the energy in the room began to shift. The laughter that had seemed so loud a few moments ago began to fade. A few people straightened in their seats, realizing that something remarkable was happening. They had come to this event expecting to see wealth and luxury, to mingle and impress, not to witness a young woman transform a broken piano into an instrument of pure beauty. But that's exactly what she was doing. With every passing moment, she was capturing hearts. One note at a time, the young woman could feel a quiet thrill rising within her, not from the attention, but from the knowledge that she was doing exactly what she had set out to do. The piano, which had once seemed hopeless, was responding to her touch, singing under her fingers. She imagined the music wrapping around every person in the room, softening the skepticism, melting the arrogance, and leaving only the pure joy of listening to something real, something heartfelt. And though she didn't notice it at first, the room was changing around her. The whispers of mockery had completely stopped. People were watching her now, truly watching, as if they were seeing not just the piano, but her determination, her talent, and her courage laid bare in front of them. Something that had seemed small and insignificant. Young woman at a broken piano was beginning to command attention in a way no one had expected, for the first time. The audience began to wonder if perhaps they had been too quick to judge. Perhaps the cracks and scratches on the piano, and the simplicity of the woman before them, did not signify failure or incompetence, but the potential for something extraordinary. They were starting to realize that sometimes beauty and talent are found in the places we least expect, and that courage can be just as powerful as skill. As she played the final note of the first piece, a soft, lingering sound that hung in the air like a quiet promise. The room remained still. For a moment there was no sound at all, not laughter, not whispers, just silence. Then, slowly, a few people began to clap, softly at first, hesitant, as if unsure they had really heard what they had just heard. But the applause grew steadily, spreading from one side of the hall to the other, as people began to acknowledge the undeniable talent that had emerged from the cracked and broken piano. She didn't smile yet. She simply took a deep breath and let herself feel the music one last time before continuing. This was only the beginning. She knew that the real test wasn't just in starting the performance, it was in holding the audience, in showing them that what they had dismissed as impossible was, in fact, real. And with that thought, she lifted her hands again, ready to continue, ready to transform not just the piano, but every expectation in the room. As the soft applause faded, a quiet anticipation settled over the room. People leaned forward in their seats, some crossing their arms, others resting their chins on their hands, all waiting for what would come next. The young woman remained seated at the piano, her posture calm but her mind focused. She knew that the first piece had caught their attention, but now it was time to show them the full depth of her music. She glanced down at the piano keys. Despite the cracks and uneven surfaces, she felt familiar with every note, every imperfection. The piano had always been her companion, her friend, her confidant. It didn't matter that it was broken or old. In her hands, it could sing as clearly as any grand piano in a palace. She pressed a key, and the note rang out softly, like a gentle invitation. Then another and another, each one flowing into the next, forming a melody that was at once delicate and powerful. The audience watched in stunned silence. Their earlier skepticism had vanished, replaced by curiosity and slowly awe. The wealthy guests, who had come expecting a moment of entertainment and maybe a bit of ridicule, were now witnessing something entirely unexpected. The young woman's fingers moved with a confidence that seemed impossible on a piano in such poor condition. Every note she played was precise. Every chord balanced perfectly, and yet there was a natural, human warmth in the music that made it feel alive. Her first piece had been simple, but now she began a more complex melody. It rose and fell with emotion, carrying a story that didn't need words. The audience could almost feel the narrative in their hearts: struggle, determination, hope, and triumph. Even those who prided themselves on being discerning critics could not help but be drawn in. The room was no longer just a hall filled with wealthy onlookers. It was a space transformed by music, where judgment and pretense had no place. A few guests exchanged glances, their eyes wide. One woman whispered to her companion, "I can't believe this. How is she making that piano sound like this?" The companion shook his head, equally astonished. "It's like the piano is new," he said quietly. "But it's broken. How is this possible?" Even the host, who had been confident in his earlier judgment, found himself holding his breath as he listened. He had never expected anyone, let alone someone so young and modestly dressed, to command such attention and skill. The young woman's hands moved faster now, dancing over the keys with a rhythm that seemed both effortless and deliberate. The broken notes, the misaligned keys, and the faded surface of the piano became invisible under her touch. It was as though she had found a secret path through the instrument, coaxing beauty from its imperfections. Each note seemed to speak directly to the hearts of those listening. It wasn't just sound, it was emotion made audible, a story told without words but understood by everyone present. The more she played, the more the atmosphere in the hall shifted. Some of the guests, who had been skeptical and even mocking moments ago, now sat in rapt attention. They leaned closer, their eyes fixed on the young woman and the piano, captivated by the way the music seemed to flow from her as if it were part of her very soul. It was no longer about the wealth of the audience or the appearance of the hall. For these few minutes, there was only the music and the person creating it. She noticed, without looking, that a few people had even forgotten to sip their drinks or adjust their seats. Their focus was complete. Their previous amusement and judgment had been replaced by something much deeper, a genuine appreciation for the raw talent before them. The young woman felt a quiet smile tug at her lips, though her eyes remained on the keys. She didn't play for recognition, but the knowledge that her music was touching others filled her. With a warmth that had nothing to do with applause or approval, the melody grew stronger, more confident, and yet it never lost its tenderness. She added subtle flourishes, small embellishments that made the music feel alive and spontaneous. Each note seemed to have its own personality, its own story, and yet all of them together created a harmonious tapestry that moved through the room. It was impossible for the audience to remain indifferent. People shifted in their seats, some even holding their breath, sensing the growing power of what they were hearing. At one point, a low, unexpected note rang out, a key that had been sticky and stubborn. Many would have seen it as a mistake, but she turned it into part of the melody, using it to add texture and depth. The audience did not perceive it as flawed. Instead, it added character to the music, making it feel even more human, even more real. This was not a performance of perfection, it was a performance of truth. And that truth resonated with everyone in the hall. A few younger guests exchanged whispers, clearly inspired by what they were witnessing. "I never thought a piano could sound like that," one said. "It's amazing how she can make it come alive," replied the other. The older guests, who had initially been dismissive, now sat silently, their expressions softened, as if the music had opened a window to something they hadn't felt in years. They were hearing more than just notes, they were hearing dedication, resilience, and the beauty of someone who refused to be defined by circumstances. The young woman continued without pause, her body swaying slightly to the rhythm of the music. She was fully immersed, every movement natural and fluid. It was clear that she had spent years perfecting her skill, hours alone with the piano, learning to turn every limitation into a possibility. The broken instrument beneath her hands was no longer a challenge, it was a partner, responding to her touch and helping her tell the story she had carried in her heart for so long. The crowd remained silent, completely absorbed. There were no whispers, no side conversations, no shifting in discomfort. Every eye was fixed on the stage, every ear attuned to the music. Even the skeptics could not deny the power of what they were hearing. It was more than talent, it was courage, vulnerability, and artistry rolled into one performance. And the young woman, fully aware of the audience's attention, played not for herself, not for approval, but for the joy of creating something meaningful in that very moment. As the piece neared its conclusion, the melody became softer, more reflective. She allowed the notes to linger, giving each one time to breathe, to resonate in the hearts of the listeners. It was a deliberate choice, a way to let the audience feel the emotion behind the music, to allow them to connect with the story she was telling without words. Some people even closed their eyes, letting themselves be carried away by the sound, forgetting the hall, the guests, and the earlier ridicule entirely. When the final note echoed into silence, the room held its breath for a moment. The young woman lifted her hands slowly, her posture calm, though her heart was still beating with excitement. She had given them more than music, she had given them a glimpse into her soul. And though she did not yet look up, she could sense the shift in the room, the transformation that had begun. Some of the guests began to murmur, softly at first, sharing their amazement with each other. "Did you hear that?" one whispered. "I've never heard anything like it," said another. The host, who had been confident moments ago, now looked thoughtful, almost humbled. Even the previously dismissive guests were leaning forward, eager to hear more, eager to witness what else this young woman could create from a piano that everyone else had dismissed as broken. For the young woman, this was just the beginning. She knew that the true challenge was not merely in proving her skill, but in holding the attention of the audience, in showing them that music could transcend their assumptions and expectations. She took a deep breath, letting the lingering energy in the room guide her, and prepared to continue. Her fingers hovered above the keys, ready to weave the next melody, one that would carry even more emotion, even more depth, and further silence the doubts of those who had laughed at her just moments ago. She pressed the next note. A hush fell over the hall. The audience knew that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that could not be captured in words alone. The broken piano was no longer an object of ridicule. It had become a vessel for art, resilience, and the undeniable power of human talent. And as the young woman's fingers danced across the keys once more, everyone in the room understood that they were experiencing a rare, unforgettable moment, one that would stay with them long after the music had ended. The room was silent now, the kind of silence that feels heavy and alive at the same time. No one stirred in their seats, no one whispered to their neighbor, and no one dared move a hand. The laughter that had once filled the hall was gone, replaced by awe. Every eye was on the young woman at the piano, every ear attuned to the melody flowing from her fingers. She had transformed the broken instrument into a voice, a storyteller. And the audience was completely captivated. Her fingers moved with precision and elegance, gliding across the uneven keys as though they had been made perfectly for her. The piano, old and chipped, responded to her touch in a way that was almost magical. Each note carried a weight of emotion, a story that everyone in the room could feel but not put into words. It was as if she had taken all the skepticism, all the doubt, and all the ridicule in the room and turned it into music that was powerful enough to silence it all. The melody she played now was richer, more complex than before. It rose and fell like waves on a quiet ocean, sometimes gentle and tender, sometimes crashing and passionate. She added small variations, subtle changes that made the music feel alive and spontaneous. Every chord she struck seemed to resonate in the hearts of the audience, filling the hall with emotion that could not be ignored. People leaned forward in their seats, some holding their breath, others closing their eyes, letting the music wash over them. A few of the guests who had been mocking her moments ago could no longer hide their astonishment. They had come expecting a weak, clumsy performance, but what they were hearing was extraordinary. One man, who had leaned back in his chair with a smug smile at the beginning, now sat forward, his eyes wide in disbelief. How is this possible?" he whispered to the woman beside him. "It's incredible. The piano shouldn't sound like this." Even the host of the event, who had prided himself on knowing talent when he saw it, could only watch, speechless. He had expected to witness a moment of amusement, a minor distraction to entertain the wealthy guests. Instead, he was seeing a young woman transform a broken piano into an instrument capable of telling stories, stirring emotions and commanding respect. There was no doubt now she had captured every single person in the room. Her music grew bolder, louder, filling every corner of the hall. The broken keys that once seemed like flaws had become instruments of expression. Some keys were sticky, some uneven, but she used each imperfection as part of the melody. When a slightly off-key note sounded, she did not correct it. She embraced it, weaving it into the music, giving it character and personality. The audience did not perceive it as a mistake. Instead, it added depth and richness to the performance. They were witnessing someone turning limitations into strength, flaws into beauty. The young woman's emotions were visible now, though subtle. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly in concentration. A faint smile touched her lips when a chord came out perfectly, and her body swayed gently in rhythm with the music. It was not a show of arrogance or performance for attention. It was pure, unfiltered artistry. She had spent years with music, learning not just to play but to feel it, to make it live through her hands, to tell stories that could touch anyone. Regardless of their background or wealth, the room seemed to shrink around her. The chatter, the clinking glasses, and even the footsteps of latecomers faded into the background. All that remained was the piano, the young woman, and the melody that spoke louder than any words ever could. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the notes fill their hearts. Others leaned forward, unable to look away, their mouths slightly open in astonishment. The energy in the hall had shifted completely, from mockery to respect. From indifference to admiration, she began to play a slower section, soft and tender, like a gentle whisper. The notes lingered in the air, allowing the audience to absorb every emotion. It was a part of the performance designed to connect with people's hearts. Even the most skeptical guests felt it. The music bypassed judgment and reached something deeper. A few wiped away tears discreetly, moved not by grandeur or spectacle, but by the raw honesty in the sound. In this moment, the broken piano was no longer broken. It had become a vessel of resilience, a medium for expression, a reminder that beauty could exist even in the most unexpected places. Every crack, every scratch, every uneven key had been transformed by her touch into a tool for storytelling. She had given the piano a voice that was powerful, emotional, and unforgettable. The audience felt it in every note, every pause, every subtle change in tempo. The young woman did not rush. She allowed the music to breathe, letting each phrase linger just long enough for the audience to feel its meaning. She played with intention, shaping every chord to carry emotion, every sequence to tell a story. Her hands moved gracefully, sometimes light as a feather on the keys, sometimes striking with strength and passion. She was fully present in the moment, fully aware of the power of what she was creating. As she approached the climax of her performance, the music became intense, commanding attention with every note. It rose and fell like a storm, powerful yet controlled, weaving through the hall with force and precision. The audience was completely silent, not even daring to breathe too loudly. Some clasped their hands in front of them, some leaned forward with wide eyes, and some simply sat frozen, unable to believe what they were hearing. This was more than a performance, it was an experience. One that would remain with them long after the event ended. Even those who had initially been dismissive, who had sneered at her simple clothes and the broken piano, were now leaning in, captivated. They had been wrong to judge, wrong to assume, wrong to laugh, and they knew it. The young woman had shown them that talent, passion, and courage could overcome any obstacle. The room had become a testament to her skill, her determination, and her ability to turn what others saw as weakness into something extraordinary. She began to slow the tempo again, bringing the music into a gentle, soothing conclusion. The notes hung in the air, delicate yet powerful, leaving a feeling of calm and wonder in the hearts of the audience. Every person present felt a sense of connection, not just to the music, but to the young woman herself, to her courage and dedication, to the story she had told without speaking a single word. As she played the final note, the sound lingered in the hall, a soft echo that seemed to wrap around every listener. She lifted her hands from the keys, her posture calm but her chest still rising and falling with the exertion of the performance. The silence that followed was profound, a shared pause in which everyone could feel the weight of what they had just witnessed. No one moved for several heartbeats. There were no whispers, no coughing, no shifting in seats, only the memory of the music and the presence of someone who had changed the energy of the room completely. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started as a few tentative claps from the front row, hesitant as if the audience was checking to make sure this was real. But the claps grew steadily, spreading across the hall until the room was filled with a sound so loud and genuine that it seemed to shake the walls. People were standing now, cheering, clapping, and even whistling, unable to contain their admiration. The young woman allowed herself a small smile, though she remained seated for a moment. Taking in the moment and letting the audience express their amazement, the host approached cautiously. His earlier smugness replaced by genuine respect. He extended his hand and she shook it politely, her eyes calm and humble. There were apologies whispered, compliments given, and stunned recognition that the young woman had not just played the piano, she had commanded it, transformed it, and turned the room upside down in the most extraordinary way for the audience. This performance would be remembered for years. The broken piano, once an object of mockery, had been transformed into a source of wonder. The young woman, once underestimated and dismissed, had proven that talent, courage, and determination could shine even in the face of doubt. And in that hall, for those few unforgettable minutes, everyone had experienced a lesson in humility, respect, and the true power of music. She rose from the bench finally, standing tall, composed, and unshaken. The applause continued, now a steady roar of appreciation, admiration, and awe. And though she did not seek recognition, she felt the satisfaction of knowing she had touched hearts, changed minds, and created something that would not soon be forgotten. In her hands, a broken piano had become a voice of triumph. And in her music, the audience had heard more than notes. They had heard a story of resilience, courage, and the beauty of human spirit. The room was filled with a quiet energy, a mixture of awe, admiration, and disbelief. The young woman had already silenced the audience once, and now, as she prepared to play her final piece, it felt as if the entire hall was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Every person present knew that this was not just another performance. This was the climax, the moment where the story she had been telling through her music would reach its peak, and everyone would understand the depth of her talent. She sat at the piano once more, her fingers lightly brushing the keys as if greeting old friends. The worn-out piano, with its scratches and misaligned keys, looked ordinary to anyone else, but in her hands it was extraordinary. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath, and let her heart guide her hands. The first notes rang out soft and pure, filling the room with a delicate melody that immediately caught everyone's attention. It was intimate and vulnerable, yet carried a quiet strength that made the audience lean in closer. The wealthy guests, who had arrived expecting an evening of casual entertainment and perhaps a bit of humor, now found themselves completely captivated. They had come with their judgments, their skepticism, and their assumptions, but all of that had evaporated under the power of her music. Even the most cynical faces in the room could not resist the emotion that poured from the piano. Some were leaning forward, eyes wide. Others had closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, connecting to something deeper than appearances or wealth. Her fingers moved gracefully over the keys, weaving a melody that rose and fell like waves on a calm but powerful sea. Each note carried emotion, telling a story that words could never fully capture. It was not just skill that amazed the audience. It was the feeling behind the music, the truth in every chord, the courage in every note. The young woman did not play for recognition or applause. She played because the music was a part of her, and in that moment she shared it with everyone in the room. As the piece grew more complex, The melody began to tell a story of triumph over adversity. It spoke of resilience, determination, and the power of believing in oneself, even when the world doubts you. The audience could feel it, each note resonating in their hearts. The piano, once dismissed as broken and flawed, had become a symbol of strength. Through her music, she showed them that imperfection could be beautiful, and that true talent shines brightest when it is least expected. A few people who had been mocking her at the beginning now sat in stunned silence, their expressions a mixture of guilt and amazement. They realized they had been wrong to judge her by her appearance, by her clothes, or by the condition of the piano. Every note she played reminded them that talent and passion cannot be measured by wealth, status, or outward appearances. One by one, they began to understand the lesson she had been teaching without words, that courage, skill, and heart are what truly matter. The young woman's hands flew over the keys with precision, yet there was a natural flow to her movements that made the performance feel alive. She added subtle flourishes, small embellishments that elevated the melody and added depth to the story she was telling. Some notes were soft, like a whisper, carrying intimacy and vulnerability. Others were strong and bold, commanding attention and inspiring awe. The combination of these elements created a performance that was dynamic, emotional, and unforgettable. As she reached the crescendo of the piece, the audience felt the intensity build around them. The music filled every corner of the hall, wrapping around each listener like a warm embrace. Some people could not help but close their eyes and let the notes speak directly to their hearts. Others sat rigidly, captivated by the sheer power and skill of the performance. The young woman was no longer just playing a piano, she was telling a story that every person in the room could feel, understand, and remember. Even the host, who had been confident and skeptical at the beginning, now looked on with genuine admiration. He had witnessed something extraordinary, something that went beyond talent or skill. This was artistry, bravery, and passion, all coming together to transform not just the piano, but the entire atmosphere of the hall. The young woman had done more than play music. She had changed the way everyone in the room perceived her, the piano, and even themselves. The melody softened again, creating a sense of anticipation for the finale. Every note lingered in the air, resonating with clarity and purpose. The audience could sense that the conclusion was approaching, and the tension built naturally. It was not an artificial suspense. It was the natural culmination of the emotion and energy she had created. The young woman's hands moved with confidence, every key struck with intention and feeling. It was a perfect balance of control and expression, of technique and heart. Finally, she reached the last section of the piece. The notes were soft, deliberate, and full of emotion. She allowed them to resonate, to echo, giving each one space to breathe. The audience could feel the story concluding, a sense of resolution that was both satisfying and moving. Every person in the room was fully present in the moment, connected not only to the music but to the young woman herself, to her courage and determination, to the triumph she had achieved through talent and perseverance. The final note lingered in the hall, delicate yet powerful, a perfect ending to the story she had told. She lifted her hands from the piano, her posture calm, composed, and yet filled with quiet pride. The silence that followed was profound. It was not the awkward silence of disbelief or discomfort. It was a shared, respectful silence, a moment in which every listener could process what they had just experienced. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started softly, hesitant at first, but quickly grew into a steady wave of admiration and appreciation. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and even whistling, unable to contain their awe. The young woman allowed herself a small, humble smile, knowing that she had not just performed, but had touched hearts and changed minds. The audience recognized that this was more than music. It was a demonstration of courage, resilience, and the power of human talent. The wealthy guests who had laughed at her at the beginning now approached her with sincere admiration. Some offered compliments, others apologized quietly for their earlier mockery. The host, humbled by the experience, extended his hand, which she shook politely. her calm demeanor showing both confidence and grace. She had proven that true talent cannot be ignored, and that courage in the face of doubt is one of the most powerful forms of expression. In that moment, the broken piano was no longer broken. It had been transformed by her hands, her heart, and her dedication into something extraordinary. The scratches, cracks, and misaligned keys that had seemed like flaws were now part of a performance that would be remembered for years. The audience had seen more than music. They had witnessed the triumph of spirit over judgment, the power of resilience and the beauty of raw, unpretentious talent. The young woman stood, taking in the applause and admiration, but her eyes were calm and grounded. She did not need further recognition. She had already achieved what mattered most. She had shown that talent and passion can overcome any obstacle, that courage can silence doubt, and that beauty can emerge from the most unexpected places. Every person in the hall had learned a lesson that night about humility, respect, and the value of looking beyond appearances. Even after the applause began to fade, the audience remained deeply moved. Some whispered to one another about the incredible performance, about the emotions they had felt, about the young woman who had turned a broken piano into a vessel of art and expression. Others simply sat, letting the moment sink in, grateful to have witnessed something so rare and powerful. The young woman quietly gathered her sheet music and stepped away from the piano. She had not only played music, she had created an unforgettable experience, a story told through sound, passion, and resilience. The room had been transformed, the audience humbled, and the lesson clear: never underestimate someone based on appearances, and never doubt the power of heart, determination, and talent. As she left the stage, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had done what she had set out to do, not for fame, not for applause, but for the music, for herself, and for the hearts she had touched along the way. The audience would remember her performance for a long time, not just for the technical skill or the notes she played, but for the courage, authenticity, and humanity she had shared with them. That night, the broken piano became a symbol of triumph, and the young woman became an inspiration. She had taken something overlooked and undervalued and turned it into a story of power, grace, and resilience. The room that had laughed at her just moments ago was now filled with respect, admiration, and awe. And in that transformation, everyone learned a lesson. Greatness often comes from the most unexpected places, and true talent cannot be ignored.